All right, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for attending the Ann Arbor, Michigan Rehabilitation Services District's National Disability Employment Awareness Month event. My name is Shanti Bailey. I am the district manager for the Ann Arbor District, and I'm so pleased to present Disability is Not an Inability, presented by, of course, Michigan Rehabilitation Services in our 2021 MRS Champion Award, Dr. Okunlami. Before we begin, we're going to go over a few housekeeping items. Please exercise patience, especially with technology. This event is being recorded and will be shared afterwards. Zoom should default to a live transcript, but you can always go to the live transcript button to either access or hide subtitles. There is also an option to view full transcript. There is a designated time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. To ask a question in the Q&A, just press the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom interface. Captioning is also available by pressing the closed caption button inside the Zoom application and choosing subtitles. At this point, I am going to turn this over to our site manager, Marie Harrell, so that way she can introduce our presenter for this afternoon. Marie.
Good afternoon. Dr. Farami Okunlami, sometimes referred to as Dr. O, is employed at the University of Michigan and Michigan Medicine. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Stanford, a medical degree from the University of Michigan, Go Blue, and a Master's of Engineering from the University of Notre Dame. Just this July, Dr. Okunlami was appointed as Director of Student Accessibility and Accommodation Services, which oversees services for students with disabilities, adaptive sports and fitness, and the Testing Accommodation Centers. He also serves as an assistant professor for family medicine, physical medicine and rehabilitation, and the Department of Urology. Dr. O has experienced the lack of accessible transportation and is working with MRS to solve this challenge. Due to his spinal cord injury, difficulty regulating his body temperature, and the multiple professional positions held, public transportation cannot accommodate him to fulfill his multiple job responsibilities within his appointments at the University of Michigan and Michigan Medicine. He has spoken with Tesla about developing vehicles for drivers with disability. He is also working with sponsors to provide additional funding. Dr. O is an exemplary MRS customer who understands the partnership necessary for a successful retention outcome. Please help me to welcome our 2021 Champion Award winner, Dr. Farami Okunlami.
Thank you very much, Marie. Good afternoon, everyone. As she said, I am Dr. O. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am a young to middle-aged Black man with brown skin, short black hair. I've got on glasses and a black goatee. And I've got a tan vest with a wooden bow tie and a colorful floral print collared shirt. In my background, you can see a shelf with some diplomas and a Block M, an American flag, and some pictures, and a whiteboard. I identify as a wheelchair user, which you cannot see that I'm seated in my manual wheelchair, and I am delighted to be with you all today. Now, first, I want to thank MRS before we get started for this opportunity, but also for this lovely thing that arrived in the mail just yesterday. So this here is a plaque that's glass that says MRS Promoting Abilities, Michigan Rehabilitation Services, Champion Award 2021 customer, and then my name. So it's this sort of glass, silver looking. Yes, it does look nice, Carissa, thank you. So I just wanted to thank MRS for that. In my remarks, I was thanking MRS really for the opportunity because it is based on the work that you all do that then that opportunity even was presented to me. So I do not see myself as a champion. I see myself as just a stakeholder in this work that we are all doing to try to provide equitable opportunities for all. Now, I will let Alyssa know, who is interpreting for us today, that I will do my best job of speaking at a reasonable pace because I tend to get excited and then I talk too fast. So thank you, Alyssa, for keeping up, and we will try to make sure that you can hear all the things that I say. Now, speaking of all the things I say, I tell people that I don't like giving talks. Now, anyone that knows me will say that is a bold-faced lie. You love talking. And I say, wait, I didn't say I don't like talking. I said I don't like giving talks. I like to start conversations. So I hope that today will be somewhat of a conversation. And I will do my best. While we don't have the chat, we do have the Q&A, and there will be a designated Q&A opportunity at the end. But if you are interested or willing, please feel free to put things in the Q&A as we go along. Because while I have slides, I tell people that if my voice is the only one you hear today, I have done you all a disservice. Because you all have thoughts and opinions and perspectives on the topic at hand. And therefore, I truly enjoy engaging in conversation around these topics because I am merely, as I said, just another stakeholder. I'm just an N of one that is attempting to then be a partner in this work to then provide equitable opportunities for individuals living with disability. So without further ado, I will share my screen because, as I said, I have some slides that I consider a suggestion, really. And then we will take it from there. So let me pull these up. All right. Okay. Does someone want to put in the Q&A a thumbs up if you're seeing my slides? Someone can say yes in the Q&A if the slides are appearing. All right, thank you, Terry. So as I said, disabusing disability is a catchphrase that I coined to try to demonstrate that disability doesn't mean inability, or disability is not inability. Now, I always give support and credit to some of my team. So Eric Rebesniks is the assistant director of our adaptive sports program. And Dr. Johan Latore is a sports medicine fellow who did his physical medicine and rehabilitation residency here at Michigan and is doing his sports fellowship with us and was one of the individuals that helped get our program up and running. And then Mr. Matthew Fritzy is a graduate student in kinesiology, who's one of our student athletes. This current iteration of the slides that you will see, they helped me put together some time ago, and I've used various versions of it since then. So I like to start off the conversation with this slide. Now, many people have seen this slide, and in keeping with my descriptions, what we're looking at here is there is an image that has two halves. On the left half, there are three individuals that are each standing on one box. The individuals are of varying heights. There's one that's the tallest, there's one that's the medium height, and there's one that's the shortest. With one box of the same size under each of them, the tallest individual can see what appears to be a baseball game on the other side of a fence. The medium height individual can also see the baseball game on the other side of the fence. And the shortest individual cannot see through the fence or over the fence because they can't see above it. Under that side, it says equality. Then on the other half of the image, the same three individuals are there standing, except this time, the boxes have been rearranged such that the tallest person has no box, the medium height individual still has one box, and now the shortest individual is standing on two boxes. Underneath this image, it says equity. All of them can now see over the fence to see the game. Now, this slide is often used in conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's usually meant to then say, well, equality and equity are not the same thing, and we should strive for equity instead of equality, because if you give everyone the same thing, it doesn't account for where they started, and that not everybody needs the same thing in order to have access. Now, often when I show this slide, people will have mixed emotions or different feelings on them. And every time I presented it, someone has brought up something that I didn't see the first time. Now, unfortunately, when I showed this slide, one of the times someone did not comment real time, but they did something online after I made the presentation. And they said, why don't those insert racial slur here buy tickets like everyone else and watch the game from the inside? Now, I'll repeat. They said, why don't those insert racial slur here buy tickets like everyone else and watch the game from the inside? Now, people are probably wondering, why are you opening up your presentation with this conversation? And it's because we don't often recognize that in conversations that we are having about trying to then reach equity or equality, that we don't all necessarily see the same thing. We see through the vantage point of what we experience or what we perceive. And therefore, we need to recognize that people have a variety of thoughts and opinions and perspectives on the same thing that we see. And having a conversation about a cartoon is sometimes a little bit easier than having a conversation about the realities of life, especially when the reality is that things look more like this. I've now changed the slide, and there's a third pane that has the same individuals, except in this one, the tallest individual now is standing on 6 or 7 boxes and is so high over the fence that they can clearly see down onto the field. The medium height individual is still standing on 1 box and they can see it. And then the shortest individual is actually in a box-sized hole. Now, this one says reality under it. Now, I'm looking at the comments because someone says that that's a smart man who knows he can watch the game if the kids can watch too. And that's a wonderful joke to throw in. And I will add to that, actually, that when I show this slide, you've jumped to some of the other points I make, because we look at this and someone will look at that as, well, that's just the lifespan. So I presented this at a Harvard Pediatrics and OBGYN rounds, and someone said the same thing. They said, I don't see this as a problem because this is just something that the adult does not need to then give the same access to the kids. And so the kids should not be able to see the same thing that the adult can see. Now, what we could say is that, how do we know that those people are children? To then get to our conversation a little closer with disability and with Michigan Rehabilitation Services, some people may say, well, that is actually someone that might have achondroplasia or might be a little person, might have dwarfism. And so they're not a child and they should have the same access. So you can start to see that the analogies and the sort of the metaphors that I draw upon with this image can really extend to then be closer to the realities of the conversations we have. Because it's much easier to talk about reallocating boxes and moving boxes around. But when we talk about the real resources that we need to provide people with equitable access, that's where people then have difficulty. Because we don't recognize that there are people on both sides of the fence. And we need to be able to then hear what people are saying on both sides of the fence to actually be able to understand what is happening. If we ever want to get to a point where we are all working together to be able to reach a mutual desired goal, we need to be able to then hear the thoughts and the opinions of people on the other side of the fence. Now, one of the times I presented this, someone was a softball player, and she said, you know, the fence is not there to keep people out. The fence is there to then keep things in. If we didn't have a fence, we wouldn't be able to then hit home runs. We wouldn't know what a home run is. Also, if there's a road on the other side of that field and the ball rolls out into the road, we put ourselves in danger every time we have to go get that ball. We love people watching our games, so it's never an intention to then exclude people. We want to include people in our games. And so when you have that conversation, then what you do is you then find a mutual goal to say, the people outside want to see in and the people inside want you to be able to see, but they need to keep things in themselves. What if we put a plexiglass wall up instead? What if the fence was chain link? What if there was something that allowed us to then let people on both sides of it have what it is that they need? And the only way you get to that is by having conversation. Now, to then bring it home with why we are here today specifically is this slide that I think does an even better job of capturing what it is I hope to say. Now, in this slide, we have people that Nothing is perfect, but as we look at this image, I think we can understand that they're trying to demonstrate different things now. So in this one, people criticized the other one to say there were all three, people that identified as male. Now we don't know that, but in this one, at least they're trying to then depict that you might have different genders represented in this image. They also had people of different skin colors. And then they have an individual that's a wheelchair user. Now, I will acknowledge that it wasn't until several months of using the slide that I saw the top right corner, which was a rainbow, which I think is also trying to represent our LGBTQ population as well. So the reason I then use these slides to open up these conversations are because people don't all need the same thing. And if you were to give me a box as a wheelchair user, that box would not allow me any better access to that game. But if you take the wood from that box and instead you build a ramp, that ramp then allows me to have the access I need to participate. Now that is the conversation around what Michigan Rehabilitation Services does, and the fact that I want to then spread that disability is not inability. Because what we need to do is change the narrative and take it away from the individual themselves being the problem, and instead of looking at the lived experience and the built environment that we have that then creates the inaccessibility of our world. Because a little redistribution of boxes or taking a box from a box and make it a ramp, that type of thing is what we can do to make sure that people are provided with the access to. Oh, I'm sorry, I guess the whole first half you're going to miss it. You're not going to get to hear it again. I'm just teasing. So we just started the recording, and that is great. So I am Dr. Fermi Okomlami presenting to you today. So we pick up back here, and I show this slide. This slide shows what I used to see as what was valuable. So as I said, I was an academic All-American track athlete that almost went to the Olympics, that used to jump and leap and bound into the sand and run across the track. I then went to medical school. I graduated with honors and went to orthopedic surgery residency. I have my family there with me. My parents were physicians. My grandfather and grandmother all have terminal degrees. My sister's a lawyer. That to me is what gave me my value. My physical feats, my mental ability, that is what I was determined to be successful because of those things. Now, I'm not saying that those things shouldn't then make people happy or proud of themselves. But the part that became difficult for me was when I ended up like this. One day, 8 years ago, I break my neck and I was paralyzed from my chest down with very minimal use of my upper extremities. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't bathe myself. I couldn't toilet for myself. I couldn't even turn from side to side in my bed. Now, the question that I didn't intentionally ask, but that popped into my mind at the time was, what use am I now? If I can't be an orthopedic surgeon, if I can't be a doctor, if I can't be an All-American athlete, if I can't be this person whose physical feats were then what defined them, if I can't then use my mind to then take care of patients anymore, then what value do I have? Now, I will quickly then pivot to make sure that you understand that I am not saying that you don't have value if you can't do those things. I am merely acknowledging the internalized ableism that I now have. I gave a talk the other day and I called it Reflections from a Reformed Ableist, because I didn't even realize how I was being complicit in a system of ableism that is the foundation upon which our country and world have been built. We haven't built this world with people with disabilities in mind. When we try to then accommodate individuals with disabilities, it's always an afterthought. It's us having to make a modification or an adjustment or a renovation to an already established systemic structure, because we did not think about disabled body minds when we put these things together. And I will say that even the medical system has a role that they play to then perpetuate this, because even though we say that we are here to then take care of people, the way that we care for them has been determined that we see individuals with disabilities and we think that their quality of life is less than they think their own quality of life is themselves. A recent article by Dr. Lisa Iazzoni is what then determined that. And many of us knew it, but she did the study to show by then polling researchers, physicians, and asking them. And physicians overwhelmingly, when assessing the quality of life of an individual living with a disability, They thought that their quality of life was lower than that person thought themselves. The implications of that are very dangerous because physicians and clinicians make decisions about what things we provide for people based on if we think it is worth it. If we think that the quality of life is worth living. And Mr. Michael Hickson passed away earlier last year from complications of COVID. This was a disabled man who his family is convinced that he would have received different care had he not had quadriplegia. Had it not been something that the clinicians looked at his life and thought it wasn't necessarily a life worth living. And so though we always need to triage and make decisions about resources, it is a dangerous place to be when we look at the lives of individuals with disability and think that it means that their life must be terrible. If we look at it and we think they cannot do much, they have this inability to do something, and therefore it must be a miserable existence than live with disability. Now, at the same time, these are always nuanced conversations because I am not saying that living a life with disability is easy. And that is also something that as I come to you with my humility and vulnerability and authenticity, I will tell you that through my own journey, I have had to acknowledge the fact that at times I have probably done more harm by the things that I say than I intended. Because I tend to be an overwhelmingly positive person, and on my social media, I would show me living an active and fun life. And I thought that that was what people needed to see to then know that they could as well. But I was then criticized by people that said, you know, you are making it seem like the disabled life is easy and everybody has the same access that you have. And we don't all have that access. And there are some days that are really hard. And when you put all those images out, sure, it might help some people, but I think you need to balance it a bit more and let people see the real life of disability. Let people understand how inaccessible and ableist our world actually is, because that is what it's going to take to actually make things different. So I tell you that I am not the expert on these topics, but I'm merely an individual that feels as though I have an opportunity to then spread a message based on the position of privilege that I am in. The opportunities that I've had, and I believe that to whom much is given, much is expected. So even though many people think that the day you see this image was the day that my life changed for the worse because I wasn't going to be able to then do the things that I was doing before, to the contrary, I think that this was the day that it allowed me to see that each of us has exactly what it is that we need. It is the world that then puts the barriers in front of us in a way that then make it difficult for us to have access. I'm a man of faith, which I don't push on everyone, but I have to add it to everything I say, because the lens through which I see the world is one that has faith in mind. And I know that that's what got me through my injury, but it doesn't need to be faith for everyone. For those that don't believe that there's someone else or a higher power that's in charge, we still need to recognize that as human beings, we have agency and we can then impact change. We can make sure that the things that we do are inclusive of everyone. We can make sure that we don't perpetuate this belief that disability means inability, and therefore we are not going to provide the appropriate boxes or ramps that people need to have access. Now, this is not a new thing. This is 31 years after the Americans with Disabilities Act has passed, and we would think that we should be closer to where we are. We should think that we shouldn't have these conversations about inability to then provide resources for people to have access. But unfortunately, we are still very, very far from that day. And just like this past year has shown that racism and sexism are still rampant around our country and world, ableism is something that people are starting to understand a bit better. I always juxtapose racism and ableism to try to explain it to people, not just because I experienced both as a disabled Black physician, but because I think that people understand racism in a way that they don't understand ableism yet. I am not calling someone a racist when I acknowledge that racism exists. Racism is a system. It is something that was not created by us, but was perpetuated by us. We all know what happened back years ago that we talk about, that we say that that doesn't exist anymore, but the structures upon which our country was founded clearly valued certain bodies over others, and that was law. And so there's still remnants of that belief that permeate into the things we do today. Now, if we think about disability, as I said earlier, our nation was not built with disability in mind. And so therefore, when I talk about ableism, that is the structural foundation upon which things have been created. And therefore, just like we need to dismantle the structural and systemic racism that exists, we need to dismantle the systemic and structural ableism that exists. And Michigan Rehabilitation Services is just one entity that is trying to do that. Because by recognizing that individuals have disability-related barriers to them gaining access, particularly to their vocation and their education, and providing the resources that people need to be able to then be active and contributing members, that is what one organization can do to then have impact. Because too often people hear this conversation and they think racism and ableism are such huge topics. How are we ever going to be able to dismantle such an unwieldy structure? And I tell people that we all can and should do whatever we can within our spheres of influence. Because if we can then impact change in the communities in which we live, if we can make sure that the individual that lives next door to you is someone that then has access, if you can recognize the fact that we are unintentionally perpetuating things that do not make life equitable for others, and we will actively try to do things to make that difference, then we will be able to dismantle those structures. Each of us has the ability within our sphere of influence to do what it is that we can. Whether it's in your PTO group, whether it's in your church small group, whether it's in your class at school, whether it's in your neighborhood community, no matter what the circle is, the sphere of influence is, once we recognize things that are occurring, are we going to do something to then make them different? I often say that the past may not be your fault, but that the future will be. And so what are we going to do to then make sure that we can make someone's tomorrow better than their yesterday? I show this slide because this was just one of the examples of resources that were provided to me. So on the left side, you see me in a standing frame wheelchair, looking into a microscope on the OB floor, trying to look to see if a woman had ruptured the membrane. So she was about to deliver her baby. So that was me looking under the microscope in this standing frame wheelchair. That was one of the things that allowed me to then get back into my clinical care of medicine. On the other side is me in that same chair, prepped and draped in a sterile fashion. Is because I'm in the cardiac catheterization lab, or the place where when someone has a heart attack, and we go and we put in the stent in the artery, or we go in and we retrieve clots. And so this one, we were going and doing a catheterization to look at the person's heart vessels. And so that chair allowed me to then be at the table. We scrubbed it in, we put it in a sterile fashion, and I assisted the interventional cardiologist that day to then do this procedure. Now, I show this just as an example of one type of resource that exists, not to say that everyone must have a standing wheelchair. And quite honestly, in my own journey, as I've said, I've even shifted my thinking, because even the standing frame wheelchair has remnants of that ableism in the background. Because the fact that I felt as though I had to be upright again to be able to then be as impactful, rather than recognizing that there are other things that can change to be able to then accommodate the individual that's in a chair. And I don't want to then create the narrative that one must be able to be upright to be a surgeon, because there are plenty of surgeons that operate sitting down. And so this is just another one of the things that, as I've gone through my journey and I have found resources and have been given resources, I've also recognized just how systemic the thought process is that makes it such that disability is not valued in the same way. Now, the examples that I've given thus far are all about physical disability. And that's because I feel as though people understand physical disability a bit more than people understand the disabilities that they cannot see. But another part of this journey for me is making sure that I give equal time to the invisible and non-apparent disabilities that people have as well. Because the stigma that exists with disability and the inaccessibility of our world, the fact that the physical things still haven't been fixed, just show just how far behind we are on the things that need to be fixed in terms of disabilities that cannot be seen. Whether we're talking about anxiety, depression, autism, bipolar, whatever it may be, disability should not be seen as a negative. Disability is just another aspect of diversity, another aspect of what makes all of us so uniquely different that we are the same. I'll say that again, because it is in our differences that we are the same, because no two people, even if they are born to the same parents on the same day, have their different thoughts and minds. And as I say, they have different body minds. And so if those two twins can be born and be different, then each of us is so uniquely different that all of us are the same. Because we can then celebrate those differences by recognizing that what we see as the glaringly obvious differences in people should not be something that separates us. It should just be something that allows us to see that all of us are diverse in our experiences, and we want to provide access for all in the best way that we can. And that is something that we should be striving to do. But the reason that we're not quite there is because we still have this stigma, this cloud that exists over disability, in a way that while it is the one group that any one of us may join at any part of our lives, it is still a demographic group that many people don't want to join because there's a negative attached to it. Even people who have disabilities often don't disclose for fear of the stigma that will come back, for fear of access that will be revoked, for people questioning, well, if that person is disabled, how are they going to do this job? I mean, if I had known that they were autistic, I don't think I would have given them that opportunity. Or if I knew that they were coming in a wheelchair, we would not have chosen this restaurant. People don't want to be seen as a burden. People don't want to be seen as less than. And because it is clear that we still view disability in a different way, we have not gotten to this point of having true conversations about equity, because we haven't even allowed people to share their stories and their lived experience to be able to then find how we can then create access for all. Now, in my position as the Director of Student Accessibility and Accommodation Services, I am blessed to have an amazing team of individuals around me that every day strive to do what you are doing at MRS, to find out how we can then identify the disability-related barriers that people have and provide them with the resources to then be active members of our Michigan community, the state of Michigan, and the University of Michigan. And to be able to recognize that while there are things that people with disabilities cannot do, I want to remind people that there are things that everyone cannot do. And what I take issue with is the fact that we define individuals based on their disability when they're disabled. But we don't define people based on what they cannot do if they are not classically disabled. And so therefore we need to change this narrative around disability, because disability is just like saying I'm a Black man. Now, while people may see Black men and think danger, while people may see Black men and think not good enough, not less, people should not think that way. And so I proudly say I am a disabled Black man, because there's nothing in those words that should give anybody any indication of who I am other than knowing the color of my skin and the fact that I identify with the community, that's the disability community. After that, we need to not make blanket statements or assumptions or judgments about people. And we should allow people to demonstrate what they can do when given the appropriate accommodations, rather than limiting people or judging them based on what we think that they cannot do. Now, I put Alabama on here for my presentation. It's actually, when I put these pictures on, it was several months ago when we started. And ironically, last weekend, I got to be in the very place that I'm showing you. I'm showing you this because one of the things that we've done here in our program is our Adaptive Sports and Fitness program, which is providing opportunities for students with disabilities to engage in physical health and wellness. Now that spans a wide range from Paralympians, and we have a first-year medical student who won gold at Tokyo this year in the high jump in the Paralympics, all the way to individuals that just want to get access to physical activity maybe once in a while. Because those opportunities should exist for everyone, no matter the level of competition or an engagement that you want, but they do not. And this, what you're seeing here, is the University of Alabama's Adapted Athletics program in a facility that is entirely theirs. Now, admittedly, I have mixed emotions when I see this facility and talk about it, because the reason that this exists is because they were not given equitable access to the existing University of Alabama athletic facilities. Now, Alabama has been around for a very long time and they're an amazing program. I've said this to them directly. I have no disrespect for them at all. And of course, if someone in the audience would like to donate $10 million to our program and build a similar facility, I would not say no. But I will say that our goal is to try to strive for inclusion. Because when I see this building, what it harkens back to is separate but equal. It's because people say, okay, well, those disabled folks want to then play sports. Well, they can go play sports over there. They don't have to use the same things we have. The resources that we have, we cannot shift to them. We can't build ramps to our existing buildings. We're just going to go build an entirely new field. Now, while that may work in some instances, and there are certainly positives that come from having your own space, what does that say when we continue to then separate people that are other? What does it say if we're not able to recognize that we can all be working together to do the things that we are doing? And so when it comes to equity and equality and disability and inability, what we need to recognize is that all of us should be able to then coexist while recognizing the shared humanity in all of us. Each one of us has flaws. And I tell people that I'm privileged. I'm privileged to then had the education I had based on my parents who then valued that and then made sacrifices for me. I'm even privileged in the fact that while I'm a man of color, there is a distinction people make between Nigerians and African Americans that I think I benefit from in a way that my Black American colleagues don't. I have the privilege of having a visible physical disability that I think sometimes people can empathize and sympathize, but that individuals with invisible disabilities don't get that same assumption of competence. I'm privileged because I'm a physician in this world that then is able to then have the financial resources to also support my life in a way that many people do not have. Now, it doesn't mean that despite those privileges that I have not been had prejudice put against me. As a Black man in this country, as a disabled man in this country, I've absolutely experienced that as well. But what I tell people is that what this should do is it should make us recognize that it is not individuals that are the ones creating these problems, but that if the individuals will work together to recognize that we are all fighting for that same equity, whether it's gender pay equality, whether it's disability, whatever that demographic is, I think too often we separate the marginalized groups and don't recognize that we can all work together to then make sure that we're having a rising tide raise all of the ships. So I like to talk about sort of practical things, and what we're doing at Michigan is we're trying to reconceptualize what these equitable opportunities can look like. Because I mentioned earlier that each of us can do something in our sphere of influence, and sometimes we have conversations and we hear talks where people are really high level about how we need to change some of these grand injustices that we see, but don't often get to a point of saying what you can do. And so within this community here, within this Ann Arbor community, I want to then just talk about our program. Because our program is something that I want to make sure that every single one of you is aware of, so that we can make sure that if there are clients that are working with you that will benefit from some of these opportunities, we can make sure to provide those resources for them. Because we talk about adaptive sports, and I talked about Alabama, and I think that people see adaptive sports as sports for individuals with disabilities. Now, what I want people to see them as is adaptive sports are actually sports that allow everyone to participate together. So you see here in this image, people playing wheelchair basketball, people in a gym doing physical activity, some children playing seated volleyball. There's a golf course there where someone is in one of the adaptive golf carts that allows you to then play as well. And then there's some children that are playing what looks like a little, game of sort of like stickball in the gym. But this is something that we can also reflect in our workplace. Because if we do not provide people with the accommodations that they need to be able to participate in work, then we cannot expect that the work product is going to be one that is going to be up to par. And so while we can then give sport wheelchairs to play wheelchair sports, then we also need to recognize that there are certain accommodations that will be needed in the workplace to allow someone to then be optimal in their work environment. Now, that is something that, once again, I know that MRS is very familiar with, and it's important to then disseminate this knowledge far beyond the choir of preaching too. because every single one of you has been dedicated to then finding those resources for individuals, getting them back to work and school, and being able to let them know that their disability should not be seen as an inability. That while they may have something that they cannot do that somebody else can, that just makes them human. And we needn't focus on the disability in a negative way, rather recognize the inaccessibility of the world that's around them and make sure that we provide the access that they deserve. And so that is something that we've started to build here. And I show this image just as a point of pride. So we started our program a little over a year ago, and we were able to then compete in the Collegiate Wheelchair Tennis National Championships in Orlando, Florida this past April. Now, I showed you Alabama, and I said that they've got amazing facilities, and every year they do very well. And they won the national championship this year for the umpteenth time. But I'm very proud of the University of Michigan Adaptive Sports and Fitness program, because in their first year of competition, they were able to then get second place. And this is about so much more than sport for us. Because while I do love sports, while it was something that, as I showed you in the images that we had earlier, I showed you the fact that I played sports, and I played sports at a high level. And I realized that the opportunities that I was given are not given to everybody else. And so my goal was to then create access for people, whether it's through sport, through giving them their educational accommodations, whether it's providing them with the testing accommodations that they need. We at the University of Michigan can make sure that we demonstrate to people that they are valued in whatever it is that they present with. Now, I failed to then look at my comments here, and I recognize that it didn't automatically scroll. And so I will tell you that the University of Michigan Adaptive Sports and Fitness program is just one example. There are plenty of other examples, and I saw many of them in the MRS Champions Award presentation that was happening last week. And so I commend all of those other champions and people that did not get the award but are doing that work. I want us to then rally around each other to support the work that we are doing together, because this world and this country need to see individuals with disabilities actively engaging to then recognize the fact that we can and will make the same impact as individuals without disabilities. And it is not that we cannot do something that should be the defining factor of our lives. It should be the fact that seeing what it is that we may not be able to do and providing that access is what demonstrates that we all can work together to then optimize the contributions of everyone. Because it's often really difficult to then feel as though you're in a world that doesn't want you there. And when you have constant reminders of the fact that you are less than, when you turn on the television or read a newspaper report, and you do not see people like you being elevated. Instead, you see people that look like you being. We know that we can do this together. We need to make sure that others are aware of that as well. And so I want to then give some time for questions at the end, because this is just an opportunity for us to share together, to then see that there are individuals like those that are on this screen that are going out and getting an education and trying to then demonstrate that disability is not inability. I am privileged to be able to then lead this program, not because I'm the first or the best or the only, but just because, as I said, to whom much is given, much is expected. And I look forward to partnering with Michigan Rehabilitation Services in the days, weeks, and months to come as we can continue to do this work together. Now, to answer the questions that are in the chat, and I will put some of them out for people to then hear. One person says that I believe the rainbow appears when they are accommodated and happy. This person lives in Petoskey and they get beautiful sunsets, but not very many rainbows. So I think that's a nice way to interpret that last image, that the rainbow appeared when everyone was accommodated and happy. Someone wanted to know how I got from Stanford to U of M. So I went to undergrad at Stanford University, and one of my assistant coaches on the track team, who actually went to boarding school in Western Massachusetts. Well, in Massachusetts, I went to boarding school. He went to boarding school. Then he went to Stanford and also ran track. And then he went to Michigan for medical school. And he was my assistant coach my freshman year, which was his 5th year as he was training for the Olympics. And he was from Ypsilanti, and he ended up at Michigan for med school. And when he was there, he kept on sort of talking about Michigan, and he was a big brother to me and is still someone in my life. And so when it was time to look at medical schools myself, I had essentially been following this template that he had then sort of paved in front of me. And I fell in love with the University of Michigan, and it was an amazing, and it still is an amazing medical school. And so that is how I ended up back in Michigan. Someone asked if I was injured before coming to Michigan. Yes, so to continue, I went to Michigan for medical school for 4 years and then matched into orthopedic surgery residency at Yale. And it was in my 3rd year of residency that I had my spinal cord injury. After that, I did my inpatient rehab at the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, which is now the Shirley Ryan Abilities Lab. And there is where I ended up having a little return of motor function, actually a little over 2 months after my injury, which at the time changed the trajectory of my recovery. But it's what I now recognize as sort of the internalized ableism of me thinking that that was the only way that I was going to still have value. Now, this is a delicate conversation because I do not see anything wrong with someone who wants to then regain function. But I think it's important how we then manage that conversation, because someone who either has an injury and never regains their function, or someone who was born without the ability to walk, I do not want those people to feel as though they are less than, because we're still making the standard being ambulatory, right? While the majority of people are ambulatory, it shouldn't mean that we then look down upon people literally and figuratively that then are not, because that is just another way to get around. And that is something that we need to make sure we create the access for. So after then I did my inpatient rehab in Chicago, I moved back with my family in South Bend, Indiana, and ended up starting a master's degree at Notre Dame in engineering, science, and technology entrepreneurship. While there, I worked on creating solutions to problems that people with disabilities faced. And at that point, I was still working on it through sort of a healthcare standpoint and medical devices. As I was there, I then finished a residency program in family medicine in South Bend, and I was appointed to the St. Joseph County Board of Health by former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who is now the Secretary of the Department of Transportation. And so it was in that sort of civic work that I started recognizing the ability to then implement change within those spheres of influence that you are in. Because while we see the problems that exist in the world, if we can do something about the problems that we see right next door, that will slowly start to then grow the foundation about the impact that we can make. So someone else said that they're an American Indian and lived in Washtenaw County for 25 years. They miss the multicultural community of that area, but they are close to their family there in Petoskey. So I'm glad that you're able to be there. So an anonymous question of, are university admissions making the same accommodations and striving for inclusivity in admitting students with cognitive disabilities? Now, I will say that we absolutely try to make sure that it is clear through our office as well that we welcome people with all ranges of disability. Now, I say that given the stigma that exists, that's sometimes hard to then reach individuals, and it's not that people have a scarlet letter on their chest and say that, but that is why getting out and having these conversations is something that's important, because I do want people to know that if you have a cognitive or intellectual disability, that does not mean that you are not able to then keep up with the academic rigor of a place like University of Michigan. Now, at the same time, I let people know that there are plenty of institutions that people can attend if the academic rigor of Michigan is not something that someone can attain, because there are plenty of people without cognitive or intellectual disabilities that don't get into Michigan. But I do not want disability to be the reason that someone doesn't get into Michigan. Because if we provide them with the appropriate accommodations, if they've been successful up to that point in their lives, with or without accommodations, then we should be evaluating them based on their merit and not their disability. But if they've been successful at that point because they were given appropriate accommodations, then we will make sure that we are then continuing to provide those appropriate accommodations. And oftentimes people figure out and realize that there are accommodations that they could have then had that they didn't have all the way up to that point. But unfortunately, what happens more often is individuals sort of suffered through high school without being given the accommodations that they could have had, not knowing that they could have gotten accommodations, and then get to Michigan or get to college. And that's the first time that they actually realize that there are offices that are there to then provide them with these things, that they are not stupid, that they are not less than, but that just like I use glasses to see, there's no reason why people cannot get given the accommodations they need, even if it is an intellectual or cognitive disability, autism, ADHD, anxiety, depression, whatever it is that makes it such that someone may need a different sort of accommodation. Because I tell people, if I wear glasses and my teacher lets me wear glasses in my exam, and you don't need to wear glasses, then why should you be critical of the fact that I have my glasses on? Now, I use this because people, when they look at accommodations, they often see it as an unfair advantage. And I tell people, if you don't need accommodations, then there's nothing inequitable about providing them for the person that needs it. I tell people that, as much as I was an academic All-American athlete, used to run really fast and jump really high, I can't do that anymore. And so if you expected me, if there was a task that said, get from point A to point B, and it's a football field, and you don't give me a wheelchair, I may be able to roll through the grass to the other side of that field, but it's going to take me a very long time. Now, if somebody else can just run down the field, they don't need the same amount of time that I need to accomplish that same task. So if I'm given extra time to accomplish that task, that should not be something that's seen as unfair. And that is the type of conversation we're having at Michigan, because extended time on exams, limited distraction environment, certain technologies that students may need to have access, those are the things that we also make sure that we provide, because those are the things that work to level the playing field. People say level the playing field, and I think we're still very far from it being level, but at least we are filling in some of the hole that's been created to then allow people to get to a place where the playing field can even be seen as a semblance of level. But we have a very, very long way to go till we get there. Now, someone said that, oh, well, this is someone just being really nice, but I guess I'll read it. So someone said, Dr. Okomlami, you are an inspiration to many. University of Michigan is so fortunate to have you in the position you hold and to continue to provide access to many at the institution and beyond. Thank you for all you do, and go blue. Thank you very much. So someone asked if I'm interested in learning about blind hockey, and I would say absolutely yes. If you are in this area, then I would say you probably know the name Timothy Kane. And if you don't know Tim Kane, then I will be happy to connect you with Tim Kane. But Tim Kane is someone who has been sort of promoting and working with blind hockey in this area. And he's also, I believe, captain of Team USA blind hockey. So Tim Kane is an individual in this community who is very, very involved in blind hockey. So Dave Klenk, if you know Tim, then tell Tim that you talked to Dr. O. If you don't know Tim Kane, then I'd be happy to introduce you to Tim Kane at some point. So this individual says that they are here because they have a physical disability. They're not a provider. They signed up through MRS for the info and to help themselves. As an older adult, they found out that they also have ADD, attention deficit disorder. And then they managed to get an associate's degree from Washtenaw Community College back in the 80s. So congratulations. And thank you for sharing your own sort of disability story. This is an individual who has now tuned in to participate in this because of the fact that this was then being done. So thank you to MRS for providing these opportunities for people to then learn and get resources. So someone wants to know how they contact me regarding more information. Do we have a newsletter, and do we only assist students at U of M or others in the community? And that is a great question to then end with, because our goal for our program is not just to then take care of the students at the University of Michigan, because we feel as though too often what we see is the University of Michigan or entities such as this that then look down in the community and don't actually provide resources for the community as well. So one of the things that our program has done is our program has actually created, we've worked with the Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living, and we renovated a space that they had there and made it into an accessible gym. And so there's actually, even as of this week, we still have more equipment coming into that accessible gym, which is open to the community. Now, there have been some sort of fits and starts with respect to COVID and how much the community can get into the building. But our goal is absolutely to then make sure individuals can then use that facility. And in addition to that, we have drop-in sessions for our wheelchair tennis and wheelchair basketball, such that people can then come to our practices and participate. We do have a waiver that you need to fill out and a release form, but we are absolutely striving to then make sure that this is not something that is just for Michigan students or just for Michigan affiliates. Anyone in this community that then has a desire for access is who we're hoping to reach. And we actually have a grant that we just got from the Craig H. Nielsen Foundation, which is going to also sort of further that desire. So we're going to be connecting people to then resources within their clinician's office. So whether you go to wheelchair seating clinic or your physiatrist's office or your primary care doctor, they will have information about adaptive sports. And then lastly, we are doing something called the Adaptive Sport and Inclusive Recreation Initiative, where we are currently embedding adaptive sports and inclusive recreation into the PE programs of all of the public schools. So AAPS, all sixth graders this year, not just sixth graders with disabilities, but all sixth graders this year will then have adaptive sports as part of their PE class. So I'm happy to then have MRS share my email or the website for our adaptive sports and fitness program to then get in touch with our office. And there's also just emailing our SSD office to then get contact if you're a student or you have students that have not yet connected with our office. But either way, I look forward to partnering with MRS and everyone on this call. I invite you all to then join some of the programming we do, as we said, and we'll be happy to then add you to our mailing list to be able to get you aware of the resources that we have with respect to adaptive sports specifically. The remainder of those resources to testing and our disability services office, that is for our students, but adaptive sports and fitness, while it is supporting our students, we absolutely support the community. And we actually would not be able to do what we do without the community, because at times there aren't enough numbers to then make a university team. And therefore we partner with the community to then have other individuals play on our team as well. So my goal would be to have so many teams eventually that we have multiple teams. But right now we are all on the same team. And that is something that also allows us to stay closely connected to the community. So our time has now come to a close. I believe I addressed all of the questions in the chat. I'll take a quick. Well, thank you once again, Michigan Rehabilitation Services. Over to you, Ms. Bailey.
Thank you so much, Dr. Okunlami. Let me just say thank you so much. You are a dynamic speaker. Words cannot express how much I've learned and just how touched this whole presentation has really, I am speechless. I'm so thankful that you came in and you spoke to us today. I have another question, but I know this 301 and we do not have time. So I'm just going to cut it short. If you have any questions, if you would like to reach out to Michigan Rehabilitation Services to find out more about what we do and how we can assist you or the community, please do not hesitate. We, as you can see on the screen, we do have Mr. Joseph Uhas and his email address. Reach out to him and he will make sure that he will get the information to where it needs to go. If you have questions specifically for Dr. Okunlami, you can still reach out to Joseph Uhas and we'll get that information to him. Again, just thank you so very much. I suspect that we will be working with each other closely in the future. I cannot wait to do so. Thank you again for your time and thank you for the attendees for coming. We really appreciate you. Michigan Rehabilitation Services, we're here to assist, maintain, obtain, or advance in employment. So at any given time, reach out to us and we're ready to help. Thank you so much for your time today. And we will end the webinar at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Go Blue. God bless.
Go Blue.
God bless.
God bless, Marie.
All right.